Hello and welcome. Today's online course is the Documentation Workshop. One of the things that I often say is that documentation is really the foundation of your case. You never know who is going to be around the next corner that is going to want to see documentation. You never know when something that you documented 2 years ago is now connected with a recent event, and you're able to show a pattern of ongoing behaviors. But so much of family court is painting a picture for whoever it is that's looking a little bit closer. And so your documentation system helps you to do that. So let's go ahead and dive in. There is a lot to cover. Welcome to the Documentation Workshop. I am Tina Swibben. First, I'd like to welcome all of you. I do want to share a few things. First of all, this is my family. These are my daughters when my battle first began in 2009, and today they are both taller than me. We have been through quite a bit. This is the very system that I use to guide me through a decade in the trenches of the family court system. That included a trial, dozens of court dates, 2 full custody evaluations. During the same time period, minors counsel was appointed, over 12 police reports were generated, and a total of 3 child welfare investigations were conducted. And I was in pro se, or in pro per, meaning I did not have an attorney. I was buried in paperwork, evidence, emails, and documentation. And I was working a full-time job, and I was a full-time mom. A lot of it is a blur. Thankfully, I did do a great job with my documentation, so I can go back in time and paint a very clear picture of what we've been through. Documentation did feel like a full-time job for me some weeks, and some weeks it was. 98% of my documentation has never been seen by anyone, nor was it ever used in my child custody battle. The 2% that did make it into the hands of family court professionals is what secured my daughter's safety, and I would do it all again to be where we are today. My children are safe, and I believe that much of my victory had to do with the way I presented my case to family court professionals. There is a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and dive in. Before we do that, I would like to share the fine print. I am not an attorney. I am not qualified to give you legal advice. And ultimately, your attorney is your voice and your advocate in the courtroom. As a family court advocate, I'm happy to share with you some of the things that I did and the way I handled my documentation, with the hopes that it will help you in your own case. If the thought of tackling documentation makes you want to crawl under the desk, please know that I have been there. My goal is to help you create a system that works for you so that you can take your power back. In my own battle, I quickly learned that strategy is critical. I learned to schedule time on my calendar to work on my documentation. I took that commitment very, very seriously. The documentation system that I will share with you today consists of an online documentation system and a binder system. Some of you may prefer paper over online documentation, and some of you may be very tech savvy. This is really the best of both worlds, no matter what your preferred style. You can put more effort into the binder system if that's your thing, or more emphasis into the online documentation if that suits you better. The online documentation system allows attorneys or other invited family court professionals to view your case while zeroing in on items that may interest them. The binder documentation system allows you to effectively present your case during evaluations or if you need to bring someone up to speed quickly. First, we are going to go over the online filing structure. We will talk about the online documentation system, which includes a main folder, a case timeline, subfolders, and supporting documents. But before we dive into that, one thing I do highly recommend is Dropbox. You can utilize the free version, which gives you a full, I think it's 2 gigabytes of storage at no additional cost. And for those who are not familiar with Dropbox, I promise you, it is very user-friendly. It's a cloud storage system that allows you to save files online and then sync them to your computer or phone. Dropbox is an integral part of connecting the files to your case timeline. So a lot of what we are going to talk about today is really Dropbox oriented. So first of all, you're going to want to create a main folder titled Divorce or Child Custody or Paternity, whatever it is for you. Second, you're going to open up a blank Word document, which will be your case timeline, and we will discuss in the next slide. Then you're going to create subfolders for each year of your custody battle. My battle began in 2009, so that is my starting point. If you have domestic violence in your marriage or relationship, you may have a subfolder for domestic violence during the relationship. Your subfolders will house documents such as court documents for that year or modification requests, police reports, declarations, or any other relevant documents. Your case timeline and subfolders, along with their contents, will all be housed in your main divorce folder. So this is literally a drop-down view of what my folder looks like. This is an example of my personal case timeline. First, you're going to want to create a timeline in Microsoft Word, Google Docs, a similar program that you can add as things progress. The timeline represents the overview of your case, such as court dates, police reports, any major events that occur. You're going to want to start with the date that your case was filed and add significant items as you go. If an event has a corresponding document, you're going to want to scan it in and save it in the appropriate online subfolder, organized by year, and then we would hyperlink it to the document on the timeline as shown here. For example, if you look at August 18th where it says Seth filed for divorce, if you click the blue text or the hyperlink, it will take you straight to the actual divorce filing in my 2009 subfolder. Even a significant email may secure a place on your timeline. I will often print an email out, scan it in, turn it into a PDF, and then hyperlink the entry on the timeline to the actual email, which is stored in the appropriate subfolder. Some people get stuck on the timeline because they want to work in chronological order. I encourage you not to overthink it to the point that you become paralyzed. Put in your start date, do a brain purge, adding in events as they come to your mind, and then you can revise or change or edit later. Just 1 hour, sit down and start capturing everything that you remember. Go back and fine tune it afterwards. Hyperlinking from Dropbox to timelines. I have a lot of people who reach out because they're confused about what I mean when it comes to hyperlinking. So we're going to kind of walk through it here. This is a little trick that's really important to the whole documentation system. So when you are viewing a file in Dropbox, there will be an option to the right-hand side that allows you to create a link to share that document. You will create a link, copy it, and then go to the corresponding timeline entry So link to timeline entry, you'll see Seth filed for divorce. If I were to highlight that filed for divorce, it's going to give me a drop-down menu. I'm going to select link and then insert link. And then you're just going to paste the link that you had previously copied. And now those two are connected. So if I were to go back to the link and click Seth filed for divorce, it's going to take you directly to the divorce filing paperwork. Your binder documentation system is for the big issues and the day-to-day issues. First, you're going to want to create a binder for each year of your custody battle. And then inside each binder, you will have blank calendar pages to lead each month, 12-month tabs, January through December, to keep your documents organized chronologically, a color coding system, whether it be highlighters, labels, tabs, whatever you want to do, and then printed copies of significant items from that year, as we discussed, police reports, court orders, transcripts, any of the bigger items. I have a lot of people who will send me photos of their binders, and they are of Pinterest quality. That is not who I personally am. I'm not that creative. However, I love seeing when people do this. And so if part of this is a creative outlet for you, make it as fun as you can. There is typically nothing fun about documentation, but if you want to make your binder the most beautiful documentation binder that's ever existed, have fun with it. That's the main point. This is an example of the blank calendar pages that will go in your binder. This is for documenting the day-to-day items that don't necessarily warrant a timeline entry, such as late pickups or late returns, refusal to follow court-ordered phone calls, issues with homework, potty regression, or any areas of regression. At the end of the month or every few months, you can sit down and quickly go through and highlight patterns that you've noted in your calendar entries. So let's take missed events for one. Those I chose to use green. I actually just use highlighters. This was put together by my graphic designer for presentation, but mine is just very much handwritten and color-coded with highlighters. So if your ex regularly misses gymnastics meets, soccer events, if you look at Saturday the 13th or the 20th, those are missed events. Let's use regression as an example. If you look at the first, Ava urinated in her pants at school. She's 6 years old. She has been potty trained since she is 2. This is not normal for her, and it happened to come on the end of a visit with Dad. So I documented that, I color coded it in my log, and I just wrote on that actual day that she urinated in her pants at school. My goal is to keep it as brief and factual as possible. And if something requires more documentation than just something quick like this, then we'll talk about that later. That's more along the lines of strategic email documentation. One of the things that you will find as you start creating these calendars and keeping track of the day-to-day issues, you capture it, you let it go, you don't let it consume your day. But at the end of the month, when you sit down to categorize things and color code them, you may pick up on patterns of behavior that you maybe had not previously keyed into. So sometimes this can be very eye-opening even for us, because we are going through the motions day to day, and things, when they are happening here and there, we don't even recognize how big of a problem they are. But if you're noticing areas of regression right after visits or right before visits, that's very telling and may set off some light bulbs for your own attorney or maybe even the judge or another family court professional. Email documentation. You're going to want a designated email address. Even if you use Our Family Wizard or another program like that, such as Talking Parents, you're going to want to have a separate email address used for communication with your attorney, any family court professionals, and most importantly, to create your documentation. One of the reasons why you don't want to be triggered when you open your personal email account due to an unexpected attack. You want to be centered, empowered, and in control. You want to choose when you're going to sit down and work on your case. Strategic communication. When we are first learning about narcissistic abuse, we are taught to use gray rock communication, where you become as boring as a gray rock so that the narcissist stops looking to you for his feed or supply. The problem with this method is that it can cause us to appear cold and rigid. Everything you write is for the court, and they want to see top-notch co-parenting. So I created something called Yellow Rock Communication. You can find more about that on the One Mom's Battle blog or YouTube channel. But essentially, it's gray rock communication with a polite, court-approved twist to it. My book, The Narc Decoder, is another great example of examples of strategic communication. And then number 3, factual documentation. If there is a significant incident or item to document, something bigger than your day-to-day calendar can capture, I sit down at the end of the day, and I used to put my kids to bed at 8 o'clock, and then I would sit down and do this type of documentation on the days that it was required. And I would do it early enough in the evening so that it did not affect my sleep. And it was just a way to release it and let it go. But I do recommend same day documentation or the very next day at the latest so that it's appropriately time-stamped. Your documentation should be factual and not emotional. If this is something that happened that needed to be shared with your attorney or another family court professional, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because then you can just cut and paste it, format an email to them, and bring them up to speed. But I would sit down and I would write myself an email to myself from myself, outlining whatever had transpired, if it was an issue with a custody exchange or something that my daughter said that was very disturbing, or any type of event related to your toxic co-parent or your child. That's where I call this factual documentation. If it is a significant item, I would print it out and secure it in your binder so that you have an ongoing record of these issues. I will say I don't recommend using the Notes app. It's not appropriately time-stamped. I see a lot of people use the Notes app. What I like to share is that if I were to go back to an entry from 2017 and add in even a comma or correct a word, it's going to change the date to today's date. So while I'm not an attorney, I can't give you legal advice. I would prefer to have something that is more time-stamped, authentic than the Notes app. Everything you put in writing is for strategy. Everything you put in writing is for the court. It is not for your ex. I kept a Post-it on my laptop that said, "To Judge CCX." That is just my reminder that I don't put anything in writing unless I would feel comfortable standing up and reading it out loud in court. At all times, we want to operate from a place of strategy and not emotion. I like to keep the following things in mind. The court doesn't know either of you. The majority of family court is he said, she said. And until someone is found to be dishonest, your words carry equal weight. Kind of the 101 of the family court system. There is a threshold of what's acceptable to the court when it comes to parenting. And their threshold is much different from mine. But even liars and toxic individuals are allowed to be parents in the eyes of the court. Many family court professionals, the majority of them, are trained to emotionally disconnect, or they are highly narcissistic themselves. So any emotion may actually trigger them. If you're dealing with a narcissistic judge, they're going to be very put off by emotion. That's where keeping things factual does not present us as hysterical, emotional, overprotective, overreactionary moms or parents. It's important to remember the burden is on you to build your case. Many times the judge's hands are tied by what they can and cannot let into your case. Another important thing to remember, I call it the family court mentality and grace period. Is it okay? No, but the reality is family court professionals look at us and say, you chose this individual to have a child with. This is not our problem to fix. They're almost there as mediators to deal with it, but these are issues that, that's where radical acceptance comes in. That is the mentality of the court system. And they have a grace period, which I believe is different depending on the judge. It could be 1 year, it could be 2 years. In that grace period, everything that happens in the beginning of your case, a lot of it is excused. It's almost like every time you walk in the door, they wipe the slates clean and tell you to go try again. Once you get past that grace period and you're still in court and there is still conflict going on, that's where the family court professional leans in and says, we've been at this for 2 years. Why are these people still in the courtroom? That's where they start paying attention and trying to understand who the problem is. But during that grace period, they give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Let's talk about taking your documentation to the next level. I call this strategic communication or strategic documentation. It requires thinking differently when it comes to communicating, and it may not be applicable to everyone, but for a long-term strategic approach, it can be really helpful if you believe there may be a custody evaluation in your future, or minors counsel being appointed, or your attorney just really wanting to build your case. So let's say Ella comes home one day from kindergarten and says, Daddy says you're no fun and you have too many rules. Obviously, she did not pull this from thin air. Many times, a high conflict individual will try to win the children over by planting toxic seeds or ideas about the other parent. We hear about sexual predators grooming their victims. This is a similar tactic of a psychological nature. The narcissist or other disordered individual is set on winning, and they know the number one way to hurt you is through the children. Depending on their impression management skills, some are more covert in their tactics, and some are surprisingly obvious and direct. So I personally view a situation like this as an opportunity to do 2 different things. One is to document the situation, and number 2 is to address the situation with the unhealthy parent. And this is where a lot of people start to cringe, but just hear me out, stay with me. My email to John would probably say, hey, John, Ella said something odd this morning that took me by surprise. She stated that you told her I was no fun and that I had too many rules. I want to ensure that we are both working together to co-parent Ella in a way that allows her to have a healthy bond and relationship with both of us. Maybe she misinterpreted something that you said. You are probably cringing right now, knowing the type of response that will follow. Here's the thing. We all know that previous email is not going to cause John to have a come to Jesus moment and step up and be a good parent, but it could serve as an alert to him. In a situation such as this, regardless of the impending attack this email will elicit, it's my goal to show myself to be the healthy parent. I welcome a scathing response because I welcome opportunities for others to see behind the mask. This requires you to shift your thinking a lot. I am essentially bringing to light a situation that is not in my child's best interest, and I'm doing it in a court-approved manner, but I'm also documenting the situation and placing him on notice that I'm aware of what he's doing and saying. If John continues this type of behavior, I will continue to address the issue in a similar fashion until I can show patterns of behavior, which may or may not escalate to attorneys, to therapists, and maybe even to court. But if John stops the behavior because he has been caught, even better, because at the end of the day, my goal is to protect Ella from toxic behavior. And this is a little bit of a checklist of some of the things that I personally use before I send an email. And I'm not going to go through and read them. You can do that. But the two last points are the most important. Number one, what is the intended outcome of my message? And then, is my message in line with my overall goals? I often ask my coaching clients, what are your categories? This is something to get focused and clear on. If you are dealing with a cluster B personality disordered individual, whether diagnosed or suspected, chances are there are many similarities between your case and others who have walked the same path. With that said, it's very important to profile the individual whom you are up against and figure out what the categories of focus should be for your case. Showcasing patterns of behavior is critical in child custody situations. You want to remove emotions and operate from strategy. So samples of some categories: anger, rage issues, inability to co-parent, mental health issues, criminal history, addiction issues, abuse, whether it be physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, inability to follow the court order or the parenting time schedule. No matter what categories are prevalent in your case, it's important to look at these items through the lens of the family court professionals. Number one, is there proof? And number two, how does the category affect the children? To showcase patterns of behavior, you're going to want to find your categories and then offer solid examples to back up each accusation. Within each category, specify the following: the first time this type of incident occurred, the most significant examples of this type of incident, and then the most recent examples. So let's take inability to co-parent. That was a significant category for my case personally. I showed the very first time he showed himself to be incapable of co-parenting, and then the most recent example. Those, in my mind, are the bookends. It's been going on for a long time, and here is what's currently happening present day. And then, because this is a category that is so significant in my case, I might actually pull in maybe one significant example, maybe three significant examples, so I can show the most extreme. So you've just painted a full picture of everything in that category. And you can do that for each category where you're saying to the evaluator or whoever's looking at your case, I know you're very busy. Out of respect to your time, I don't want to overwhelm you. I've brought in 5 different examples of the things that I'm struggling with when it comes to co-parenting with this person. But if you'd like to see more examples, I could give you dozens of others. So you're basically putting them on a pedestal. I know how important you are, Mr. Evaluator. I recognize that. I'm in awe of you. And if you want more, I have dozens or I have hundreds of other examples. So you're showing how significant of an issue this actually is in your case. There are 2 main types of custody evaluations. One involves a psychological evaluation and one does not. It's a full custody evaluation without the psychological testing. You want to be really clear on what exactly you're walking into. If you are preparing for a custody evaluation of any type, do not self-diagnose. My strategy was to paint a picture using the diagnostic criteria of NPD, the things that were specific to my case. So I actually printed out all of the diagnostic criteria for several of the cluster B disorders: antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. And then I looked through those and I highlighted the ones that were specifically relevant to my situation. And then I narrowed it down even further. Which of those items were directly affecting my children? And so if it's a lack of empathy, I'm not going to go in and say, I'm divorcing a narcissist. That's a huge no-no. I'm not qualified to make that determination. But if I'm painting a picture for the person who is qualified to make that determination, I want to give him all of the pieces, or her, all of the pieces that they need to paint that picture, that this person is highly toxic. So if I'm looking at the diagnostic criteria of NPD, some of the things that stand out to me: sense of entitlement. This person seems to be above court orders. No empathy, how that is affecting my kids. That this in general is really about power and control. So those are the items that I want to use personally to paint a picture for the court. It's going to be different for each person. And so you really want to be clear on who you're up against and what the issues are. When it comes to child support, I know that's a huge topic for so many people who are divorcing toxic individuals. You have to remember that one of the narcissist's biggest buttons, if not the biggest button, is money. They're all different, they're all the same, but they all share that button. So when it comes to child support and documentation, I personally kept my child support completely separate from my family court case. I have a separate timeline, a separate binder, and separate documentation, which is ready to go at a moment's notice or if an unexpected court date pops up. But I do not like to mix these two things because in my mind, they are very, very separate. And in the mind of the court, they are very separate. I hear about narcissists who owe $200,000 in back child support in arrears. It does not affect their child custody situation at all. So for multiple reasons, I am a huge fan of separating these two issues out. You also have to remember, while it is their biggest button, it is your greatest leverage. And that plays out differently depending on each situation. But it is an area where a lot of people use finances as leverage to secure the safety of their children. So sometimes it involves thinking outside of the box. Money gives you the opportunity to have some leverage. A divorce or child custody battle with a narcissist is about three things. It's about winning, control, and money. While the relationship with the cluster B individual probably contained multiple types of domestic violence, such as physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and financial abuse, it's important for you to be able to articulate the post-separation abuse as well, and how these things are affecting your children. Some examples of post-separation abuse are shown here. Counter-parenting. They have so much hatred for you that they are driven by anger and revenge. Domestic violence by proxy. They are using the children to exert control. They are using and manipulating the children to place them in the middle. A lot of people refer to some of these behaviors as parental alienation. For a variety of reasons, I refuse to use that terminology. And I encourage you to also investigate the origins of the alienation movement as well as the present day movement. I strongly advise people never to use that word. The next on the wheel, neglectful or abusive parenting, exposing the children to unsafe situations or people, discarding the children. A lot of times these people will wage a child custody war for 50-50, only to discard the children with caretakers, with their parents, with their new feed supply. This is a common topic post-separation. Isolation, that is typically the smear campaigns that we see post-separation. Harassment and stalking. It's usually very covert in nature. It usually flies under the radar, so it doesn't stand out like the typical abuser who will just go out and threaten your life or cause physical harm. They're more covert, and therefore documenting these issues to paint a picture is really important. Legal abuse. The abuser wears a mask in the courtroom, behind closed doors, or outside of the courtroom. They set their mask down. They use the court to further their abuse. And then finally, financial abuse, a lot of financial games, deception. The sole intent is to hurt or control the healthy parent. So being really clear on post-separation abuse is going to be important as you try to articulate and explain what this is about and what you are currently dealing with. If you are feeling overwhelmed, please know you're not alone. Your documentation system will forever be a work in progress. And no matter where you are in this battle, you can take your power back by taking control of the mountains of paperwork. I like to think of this system as a 1,000-piece puzzle. It's really overwhelming if all of those pieces are just piled up in front of you. But if you start to grab one piece at a time, pulling together your desired picture, you are going to get to that end zone a lot faster. It's just starting the process sometimes. Documentation is critical to protecting your children, but it doesn't have to consume your life. Once you are feeling organized, this system will allow you to pull together mini timelines for specific topics such as abuse, inability to co-parent, maybe addiction issues. A couple of examples in my own custody evaluation, I utilized the main timeline along with my documentation to create a separate miniature timeline of his alcohol abuse. which was a topic of concern for my judge and in my case. Addiction issues, whether they are sex, porn, drugs, work, alcohol, it can be really helpful because it keeps the narcissist from operating at their full potential. Another mini presentation is what I refer to as the nutshell version. I kept a small binder. It was a 1/4-inch binder with my current court order, business cards from professionals on my case, restraining orders, any really relevant documents. I just carried that in my trunk. You never know when you're going to need it. And it came in very handy for me when dealing with CPS or law enforcement unexpectedly. No matter what the categories are in your case, this system will help you to regain control and properly articulate the issues to the family court professionals who are tasked with investigating your family or your case. And the more organized you are, the more empowered you are going to feel. I know personally much of my own PTSD and anxiety is a result of never knowing what is going to hit next. These people are so unpredictable. So being organized keeps me centered and in control. I recommend scheduling chunks of time on your calendar that could range from 2 hours a week to 15 hours a week, depending on your case requirements. And then if a thought or an action item floats through your mind on a random Tuesday or in the middle of the night, jot it down on your calendar to tackle on your next scheduled day, and then let it go. You do not have to be consumed by this. So if I schedule Tuesdays and Friday mornings as my documentation days, hold to that. Keep that commitment to yourself. This is a marathon. It's an ultra marathon. And you have to remember that the narcissist trains for a 5K. Some of them may train for a 10K, but the overall vantage point that you have is that you're in this for the long haul. You are capable of parenting. The narcissist is not. They're going to do this, they're going to have short bursts of energy. They're going to try to come after your children. But the reality is, and I see it play out all the time, even when they are successful in obtaining 50-50 custody, they start losing their momentum because they're not capable of showing up as a parent. And that's where your documentation becomes even more critical, is sometimes right after these court dates where they feel like they've had a huge win or a victory, and now they have 50-50. I don't believe anything is final in family court. I think right after a huge court date, when they've had a huge win, is usually when they set the mask down. So surround yourself with resources. Keep your mentality focused on the ultra marathon. That is what this is. If you need additional, we have online courses on strategic communication, mediation, safeguarding your case from alienation claims. Our YouTube channel is free. We have the Lemonade Club, the state chapters, and our wonderful OMB Facebook community. You should not have to go through this alone. My heart and my prayers and positive thoughts are heading straight out to you. Take care of yourself and keep your oxygen mask on so you can be the rock for your children. Take care.